Hey folks, this is Rhykker with another Diablo 3 video on the Necromancer. We're gonna go over more skills in this video. Be sure to have checked out part 1 where we went over the primary skills, the generators. In this video, we're gonna go over the secondary skills. This is where it gets more fun. So we're gonna showcase the skills, all the runes, and give our thoughts and impressions on how good they are. Alright, so going over our secondary skills, we're going to start with Bone Spear returning from Diablo 2, but looking quite a bit different. Now, as you'll see, the Bone Spear actually shoots off quite far away. And in fact, I think if we shoot and then Blood Rush off, you can see that it's about, what was that, 2 to 3 screens of distance away. Now, one thing to note about the Bone Spear is that it pierces. That means it goes through an enemy and can hit more enemies, dealing 450% damage to all enemies it passes through. So let's try to line up some enemies here. Bam, see through both of them, it deals the damage. Now we're going to go apply some runes to it. We're playing on a difficulty where we're not just going to insta-kill enemies. So starting with Blighted Marrow, damage is increased by 15% for each enemy that Bone Spear passes through. So, we're going to try to line up a bunch of enemies. So that looks like a good number of enemies. Bam. Alright. Now we're going to do a breakdown when we will analyze the video, rather. We'll take a look at those damage numbers. But, again, it should be 15% more damage for each enemy that it passes through. This here should net us with a lot more enemies right now. Okay. Now the question is, does this cap at a certain point? Because I don't think it specifies that it does, so... The one problem that we're immediately seeing is that it's a fairly slender spear. In other words, the hitbox doesn't seem quite as large as, say, the door throwers of Act 1. Then we have Teeth. You'll recognize that returning from Diablo 2, but again, it's got that different appearance. So in the D2 Necromancer, his Bone Spear, his teeth had that spectral, magic-y appearance. Well, here it's looking a lot more meaty, physical. Alright, now that we're generated back up, we're going to shoot it out. And as you can see, the teeth kind of shoot out a little bit like multi-shot. Now, the interesting thing is that we actually predicted that teeth might be a rune on Bone Spear. That comes out in sort of an arc. And so, interesting that our prediction turned out to be pretty spot on. But Teeth is definitely a nice power right here. I think this is a lot better than the first rune, because again, it just hits more enemies. It's a little difficult to hit all enemies in a line. Maybe if it was a wider column area of effect. But right now, it seems Teeth is pretty clearly superior. Then we have Crystallization. Each enemy hit has their attack speed reduced by 20%. And your attack speed is increased by 3% for 3 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. Now that's significant. That means up to 30% increased attack speed. That's going to allow us to regenerate our essence very quickly. So let's go try that out. That seems pretty significant. I like this skill. And it seems there might be some use to it, particularly the fact that it gives you up to 30% increased attack speed. It could have some utility that is applicable to more than just this skill. So that's definitely an interesting choice. Next we have Shatter. Instead of piercing, it now detonates on the first enemy hit, dealing 450 damage to all enemies within 15 yards. So this makes it a little bit more useful with respect to actually hitting targets. Again, the whole passing through enemies thing, it's a bit troublesome here. It's easier to hit a lot more enemies at once. Now with Bone Spear, I probably actually want to be combining not the Grim Scythe generator, but a ranged generator, as we went over in our generator video. But as you can see, that's a pretty useful rune on Bone Spear. Easily a contender for the best. And then lastly we have Blood Spear. Now Blood Spear, damage is increased at the cost of health. So that's one thing with blood skills in general in this game. When there's a blood rune variant, it's going to deal more damage at the cost of health. And the devs were talking about that being an intentional design decision. So the base spear does 450% damage. This one does 518. That's precisely a 15% damage buff at the cost of 10% of your health. So is that worth it? It's still just a piercing spear. Shatter still seems more useful. Again, in general in this game, area damage tends to be king. Maybe if we're talking about single target damage, but I'm gonna guess that there are better single target damage skills. But we'll keep going. We'll find out. Overall, Bone Spear, first impression seeming like a good skill. So next we have Skeletal Mage. Now don't worry folks, you will be able to have a big army, a big summon army as a Necromancer if you so choose. I know we didn't show that so far in our gameplay footage, but there is a skill right over here. Command Skeletons, that's going to have a bunch of skeletons that stick around with you, travel along with you. You can also summon your golem, you can summon a bunch of different things. Some of them only last for a certain amount of time, but others are more permanent, so in all, when you got all your summons going, you can have a large army. But for now, Skeletal Mage was made into a skill that is temporary. So you have, for 6 seconds, a Skeletal Mage that, as a baseline, does 400% weapon damage. Now, this is at double the cost of a Bone Spear for slightly less damage, but again, it is attacking multiple times during those 6 seconds. So we're going to summon one right now, and as you can see, just as a baseline, he attacks pretty quickly. So the disadvantage here is that you don't get to control who he attacks, but overall, right away, that's more powerful than Bone Spear at the expense of not being able to, again, control who the mage attacks. Now, the first rune is Gift of Death. This causes your Skeletal Mage to leave a corpse behind when he dies, or rather when his duration expires. So we can just show that right here. Now, of course, corpses are an important resource for the Necromancer. We will eventually get to corpse skills, but there you see, there's his corpse. So, is that necessarily worth it? Maybe, maybe not. But basically you'll see that there are a number of skills that allows the Necromancer to sort of passively generate corpses, addressing an issue that, a major concern that a lot of us had, which hopefully will no longer be a concern now. So next we have Skeleton Mage Contamination. This summons a mage that channels an aura of decay at a rate of 175 damage for its duration. So that's 175 damage over 6 seconds to all enemies in an aura. Alright, so we're going to find a group of enemies right here. We're going to cast them in the middle, and there you go. That is some nice AoE right there. Now, that is nice, significant damage. Next rune is Skeleton Archer. So this one deals a baseline 400% damage. However, it increases your attack speed by 3% for 5 seconds each time they deal damage, up to a maximum of 30% increased attack speed. Now, one thing to note is that you can have multiple archers, or multiple mages rather, summoned at the same time. I believe you can have a maximum of 5, but we're going to run through here. We're going to summon these guys. See, we got 2 up right now. Typically, you're supposed to see the little icon in the top left. Sometimes it doesn't appear. It seems to be an error, but we had, I think, again, their duration is very short. It's only 6 seconds, but see right there, Skeleton Archers were maxed out at 10 stacks, so 30% increased attack speed right away. Summon a few here. We're gonna jump this up, summon more. And I'm not sure why it's not appearing. It was appearing before, but you can see we had 4 summoned right there, pop up a 5th. So that's definitely an interesting choice, and specifically for that 30% attack speed buff, could potentially see some application. For instance, you might want to combine this with Grim Scythe Execution in order to be attacking more often to finish off a Rift Guardian, for instance. Next, we have a very interesting one, Skeleton Mage, Singularity. Consumes all essence to summon a powerful minion. The minion's damage is increased by 3% for every point of essence consumed. Now, just for reference, I have a maximum of 200 essence right here, 200 potential essence. So at a rate of 3%, that's 600% more damage. So if I'm doing my math right here, that's taking us from 400% damage up to 2,800% damage. And if you're able to refill your essence quickly enough, you could possibly have more than one of these active at a given time. So as you can see, he's one-shot killing everything right now. He's just destroying everything. And in the time that he's killing everything, I could be just regenerating all my essence. Let's test this out now on Zoltan. Cool, we're going to start by just taking some pot shots with our generator. Alright, summon him and... where's that damage? Bam. Everything is just wasted. Our minion took care of everything. And of course, you can also be putting Paragon points into more essence. This is sort of like the Unhallowed Essence. Oh my god. Unhallowed Essence. What? So the Demon Hunter Unhallowed Essence set basically makes you deal more damage for how much resource you have. And I'm sorry, I'm way too amused by that. But yeah, basically you can spec your character to buff how much essence you have to cause Skeletal Mage to do more damage. Certainly an interesting choice here. And then lastly we have Life Support. Risen Mages cost 10% health to cast, but last an additional 2 seconds. So 2 additional seconds comes out to a 33% damage buff, effectively. Now overall, I like the Skeleton Mage skill. I think Singularity could be a fantastic solo target killer. I think Contamination is a great AoE area killer. Gift of Death might have some application. It only leaves behind 1 corpse, but you could spawn it pretty frequently, so that's not bad. If you're really dependent on corpses, you might want to go this option. But I feel like there might be some better options for getting free corpses. Life Support, it's a small buff. I don't think it's worth it relative to either Singularity or Contamination. And Skeleton Archer, again, if we can find some reason to super stack attack speed, that might also come into play. So overall, I'm very happy with the Skeleton Mage skill. And that leaves us with Death Nova. So its base effect is pretty straightforward. Big splash, 25-yard radius, some good damage. Now let's see the runes. Unstable Compound. Each cast increases the radius of your next Nova by 5 yards, up to 2 times. So that means you're going from 25-yard radius up to 35-yard radius. So to give you some idea of how far that is, I suspect it's going to be about where my mouse is. Let's see. 1 and 2. Nope. Is that not working? I'm wondering if it actually needs to hit enemies. Alright, 1 and 2 and... that's odd. It doesn't seem to be getting any bigger. I wonder if that is normal or not functioning as intended. Next rune is Tendril Nova. This allows you to heal for 1% of your health per target hit, and reduces damage dealt. Now this is ambiguous as to what this means. Typically, the wording is very clear. If this means that our Death Nova is dealing less damage, why are the numbers not explicitly stated? Alright, we're gonna run off, try to take some damage here, in the midst of a bunch of enemies. And the heal is pretty good, as you see there. So we're going to compare that damage to the base rune, or to unruned, and we'll let you know whether that's actually dealing less damage. So it does seem like the rune that heals you deals less damage, from some quick observations. But that is bizarre then. Why is it not telling us exactly how much damage less it is doing? Next rune is Blight. This basically leaves behind an area that causes enemies to be slowed and deal less damage. It's not a poison dot effect, but it is a temporary nerf. Then we have Bone Nova. That deals more damage at half the radius. The thing is, your damage isn't doubled. So your radius is halved, your damage isn't doubled. So my initial impression is that that's not great, but, I mean... at some point, you get diminishing returns on area. You're not going to have a million enemies on screen, so generally when you're fighting clumps of enemies, that kind of area, you can see how big it is. You know, we get in here, and we can deal with all this right here. So, it's more concentrated damage in a smaller area. It does certainly seem to be a viable choice, at least. Particularly when you combine it with the dual sides that allow you to group up enemies. And then lastly we have Blood Nova. This deals 450% damage in the full 20-yard radius, at the cost of 10% of your health. Now generally the Necromancer has enough life regen, I would say, to be able to handle that level of cost. And the added area, I think, really is a good trade-off. So I would think that this rune probably is the best rune on Nova. Now, typically you would have some skills to help you regain health. Of course, if you're going specifically for, you know, blood skills, we don't quite have that right now. But we're gonna pop this back on and deal some massive damage.
I must wait longer.
And that covers Death Nova. So overall, Death Nova is definitely the best area of effect killer. At the cost of 20 essence, which is the same as a Bone Spear, you're dealing damage in a much larger area. You're doing about the same damage as Bone Spear. The big trade-off is you're sort of in melee range. So all three of these skills, I would say, are viable. All three are useful, all three have different application. If you're going for a melee build, then you want to go with Death Nova. I think amongst the Death Nova runes, you got a couple that could be useful. Then the other two, if you're going for a pure ranged caster build, Bone Spear is a great choice. If instead you want to be more of a summon Necromancer, then Skeleton Mage all the way. I think all three of these skills are great. They have their application, they got interesting runes. I think these are well executed. And that's going to wrap up part 2 of our look at the Necromancer skills. We still got to look at the Corpse skills, Reanimation, the Curses, Blood and Bone. And of course, these are still my early thoughts on these skills. As we do more testing in the beta, these opinions may change. So that wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment with your thoughts on these secondary skills. Do you think all three are useful? Also leave a comment with what kind of coverage you would like to see. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.